Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, this is the time, folks. You have carte blanche to be able to kind of lead with Jesus, even though, as I said last week, and we'll continue to say, Thanksgiving, Christmas, they're not about Jesus at all. They just are not. It's about shopping. It's about anxiety. It's about deals. It's about Cyber Monday, Black Friday. It is not about Jesus. So you're almost making things messy when you start asking people about Jesus during Thanksgiving and Christmas. My wife and I were laughing a lot at the correspondence that's sent out by our company to the employees. And there was a time, if you remember, probably for those of us who've been in the workforce for a while, when there would be something about giving thanks to God. Well, you're not seeing that anymore. No more. It is family and friends and food and gathering and shopping.
A lot of people don't even call it Thanksgiving anymore.
Christmas Day.
Thanksgiving.
Correct.
Friends Day.
Right. We got into a discussion with a relative who wanted to tell us that the encounter with the indigenous people of the United States and the colonizers never occurred, so that Thanksgiving was an event. So I've got Sarah looking at me. So basically what I'm saying is the Pilgrims and the Indians never really happened. It's just fabricated.
People love to rewrite history.
They do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, and this is okay. This is my hobby horse here. It's a lot easier to, shall we say, rewrite when you don't have things around of size and substance that can go the other direction for you.
Okay.
And this is why we've had our statues taken down. Because if the statues were there and somebody says, well, there really wasn't a war between the states, well, what's that all about then? And now it's going to be gone.
So,
Well, it goes back to like Will's sister, the seeing is believing.
Mhm.
And so now people don't see any tangible evidence of any of that. So
it probably wasn't.
it probably wasn't, or it didn't happen the way people say that it did.
Correct. And believers, that's partly why your Jesus encounters matter, because the only evidence in many ways in the United States and the Western world that Jesus is the special revelation some of you are holding, and y'all who are gifted with the Holy Spirit living inside of you. That is the evidence, and this is the evidence. Seeing is believing, a very important component.
I can't wait to get to our evolution component of our discussion. And we could ask Will's sister, seeing is believing, how do you believe in evolution?
Oh, that gets easy.
Okay.
Oh, man.
Nope, none of us were there. Either way.
Doesn't matter. Jurassic Park tells you.
Okay.
So thanks, folks. Every week, especially if Sarah's not reminding us, I'm going to ask us about your potential Jesus encounters, especially as we lead up to New Year's. This is your time to do that. Boldness sometimes is the opposite of that is fear in some regard. So sometimes you've got to practice saying asking the tough question. And Brother Gene said here, I'm going to throw a grenade out to the middle of the room. Sometimes when you have a person who's talking a whole lot, and you can't seem to steer the conversation, sometimes you just ask a Jesus-oriented question and see what folks do. Now, it might be a career stopper or a conversation breaker, but oh well, you threw it out there just to see how folks are going to manage it. It gets easier with practice.
So Peyton's question is, what's going to happen after that? Which is kind of bold.
But it's the right question to ask for people in that condition and in that state of life. Because asking that question right now for us is not so much an issue because we still think we've got 20, 30, 40 years left, unless you're like Irene Cara, and then you get less time, right?
It reminds me of a fellow that was a barber. And this was back in the day when he actually shaved people, and the Dutch were just cutting hair. And so one of his favorite things to do was to get the straight razor, put it at the throat and say, "Do you know for sure where you're going when you die?"
Yeah, I like Diane reminding us of that because, folks, we go through certain phases of life. And the question that Pam has shared with Diane, that's what she asked, which is where you're going, what happens after you die, works for folks who are feeling frail, who are feeling infirm, who are feeling like that life is tenuous, that they don't know what's going to happen next day to day. In part because there's a fear factor that probably begins to overtake and overwhelm us as we get older and begin to lose kind of that which we perhaps used to be. And that question is much more pertinent for folks at that stage. For us, it's a different situation. You almost have to engage us in what's the meaning of life? What's the whole purpose of it for us? Because we're still career oriented. We're still trying to make an imprint. And so we almost have to come at it that way. You have a comment?
No, because it would have been a stupid comment because you said, "What's the meaning of life?" I went back to Hitchhiker's Guide to. I'm sorry.
Right, that's okay.
Sorry.
It's all right.
Which is why I didn't say anything. I just smiled inwardly, but apparently it was outwardly.
So, again, well, I would like to play poker with you a lot.
No.
Absolutely. Bye, honey.
So, Jesus Encounter's going once. Jesus Encounter's going twice. Jesus Encounter is temporarily sustained until next week. So we'll ask you about this. So, if illegal immigration, shouldn't we just let everybody into your country because people have needs? You have what it is that would make their lives better. And aren't you being bad citizens and bad Christians by not allowing people into your borders?
Well, you got that lady in the harbor in New York, yeah. Because she says, send them to me.
Okay, we're talking about Madam Liberty, Statue of Liberty.
What if that person was the devil? You know what I mean? Like, what if you accidentally invite the devil out?
I mean, as an immigrant from another country?
Yeah.
What? So now, when you say the devil, do you mean a person that's under demonic influence?
I mean, someone evil.
We got enough of those in the country already.
Yeah, but you have more,
But there's a distinction between illegal and legal.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're supposed to, even we talked about last week, obey the law of the land, Acts 17:26, and Romans, and the law of the land is you can come.
Yep.
But there is a process to go through.
Right.
And that's what we should all be espousing.
Correct.
Is that process. Because yes, we are called to help.
Yep.
But you got to do it the right way.
Correct. Yes, that's a tough statement for Christians sometimes to hear. Because we talked briefly as we were kind of closing shop last week that one of the prime practitioners or mispractitioners of this are priests, if not ministers. Because not only do they take in illegal immigrants, they shelter and hide them. So doesn't that suggest if we're not in position to do that, that we're heartless, that we're uncaring, that we are not being brotherly, that we're not showing love to our fellow man?
Being more caring if we do it the right way. Because if you do it the wrong way, they're going to get kicked out anyway, and it's going to have a whole lot of repercussions. Whereas, aren't we showing more love if we help them do the right way?
Yeah. Sarah's talking about law versus
Chaos. Because there's no structure to support them, so it's almost like they're but we don't know what they're fleeing.
Okay.
But it's not good either when they're here and we don't have the resources.
Okay. So when you're talking, we don't know what they're fleeing. Remember, we talked about this briefly last week too. That if someone is seeking asylum, there's a method for going down that particular route. A lot of the folks who are looking to cross the border are coming for a change of their lifestyle to the American lifestyle. And Sarah throws the question out to say that aren't we helping people more so if we help them to do things according to the law, as opposed to meeting their immediate need, which is shelter and food, and then we continue to harbor them, but they're basically fugitives.
And then you become problematic too.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about that, church people? That sounds like maybe that's an unkindness thing.
So, okay, who sets the boundaries of the nations?
Wow. So do you mean the that the nations are, or you mean the rules of the nations?
Well, let's start with that the nations are. Because essentially the idea behind immigration today is that there shouldn't be a nation state. There are no nations. That's the idea behind it. Whether the average guy sneaking across the border doesn't have that. The people that are supporting that and in some ways funding that do.
Genesis 10.
Systemic.
Yeah.
How about Acts 17:26? And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place.
So
17:26. So God has already ordained that there are going to be nations, that there are going to be boundaries, that there are going to be people that live in those boundaries. I mean, it's still in the beginning God, right? And so some things that like you can go back to the Statue of Liberty, and yes, the idea was open immigration. However, there was a process in place for that. And the idea being when you have a melting pot of different people from different backgrounds and different cultures, that you have to have some sort of shared culture in order for that to work. That's why when you came into the country, there was a process that you went through, where you went through classes and you learned history and the language and all those things. And so you have those things in common, and it's more a part of America. Well, people will disagree with you, but there was a Judeo-Christian morality behind it. So what happens now when you have unregulated migration, you get people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different languages coming in, and none of that is focused on having any shared value with the people who already live there. And so when you have that, you hear this message all the time: diversity is our strength.
Right.
Diversity is our strength. It's not really true when it comes to a nation, because when diversity of ideas is great, because if you can have a discussion about those ideas, you can reach a conclusion on which one works the best. But when that doesn't exist and everybody's doing their own thing, you've got judges, right? You've got chaos. And so that's why you see things in other countries where there's, especially Europe. We have an immigration problem. Europe has had an immigration problem for a while.
Correct.
And when you look what's going on in Europe, they had a young girl in England, I think, was abducted by some immigrants who came in from Africa. She was beaten, tortured, raped repeatedly, and killed. And they're like, well, this is what it is, with immigrations. And that's part of the issue, because you have different backgrounds, different cultures, and diverse understandings about morality and those things. Because if you come in and think somebody's an infidel, it doesn't matter what you do to them. You can torture them, you can respond. So that's the real issue to me, is what really is a breakdown of God's design for the way the world's supposed to operate.
I'd like to add to that, if I may. And by the way, I was being a bit facetious about Lady Liberty. When you cite 1726, that division of land, if you will, also carries with it, whether or not we recognize it, a different politic, a different government. If you're going to have a line, there's a line that's there that also is not just a physical line that you can see from space. We're talking about a line that is a difference in the way it's governed. And I think and that's really what it's headed for. And just exactly what Sarah said. Yeah, it's open, but there is a process. And to your point, it seemed like to me that the very thing that you suggested is what Will was talking about. You let anybody in it, then
Correct.
they can do whatever they want to because they're not in agreement with the societal norms of that.
That's why there's even, I forget where it is, but aren't there some sections in the US where you have the different sects?
Sharia.
Sharia law. So,
Michigan.
okay, thank you. I know there's like something that I don't want to mistakenly say that,
Right.
but they've even got, those are almost like,
The police don't go in.
right,
those
because
districts.
it's like their own little
Microcosm.
nation.
Yeah.
Just about, and it's within the walls of the US.
Correct.
So they don't follow our laws. And to me, that's a problem. That to me is a problem because then it's like, like Steve said, you got judges, right? To each their own.
Mhm.
So they can create their own little sect of land and do whatever they want that they brought over from their country, as opposed to coming here and adopting the customs that are in the land to which they are going.
Correct. And Steve's point was a terrific one, followed up by Brother Gene, and it did address what Will said is, what if we're letting somebody in with bad intentions? Well, when the system is in place and it's working the way that it should, it doesn't mean that person is no longer going to be who they are, but they're going to have legally gone through a systematic process to say this is what it should look like. And if you can't operate according to these, well, then you might find yourself in trouble with the law at some point in time. And I like what Steve brought up because we understand how that works even from an historical standpoint, that when you meet the three Hebrew boys, right, the Babylonians understood this precept really, really well, which is how they would bring in folks from the nations they would conquer, and they would take the brightest and the best and probably the most youthful, and then indoctrinate them into the Babylonian way so that they would, from an early age, begin to espouse those Babylonian virtues and practices that would make Babylon even stronger. And when we take a look at Ellis Island, when we take a look at what early education was, it was about helping you understand how to contribute to this country and its greatness by being good citizens. So civics and citizenship used to be classes that you took in school. They're no longer the same kind of thing because that's not really important in some ways, because now that means the folks who are citizens here don't understand and value their own citizenship.
There's a good point there also, because I'm thinking in the back of my mind, well, if we're regulating that is contrary to the freedom we're trying to espouse. But no, my freedom of speech ends when it comes to hollering fire in a kind of theater.
Right.
There are regulations that make it free for everybody, but everybody is also abiding by certain expectations.
Correct.
So just so that's said too.
Yeah.
So free.
You Christians.
Yeah.
We live in the greatest country in the world. We have more money and more wealth and more resources than anywhere. Why would you want to keep out these people who have an existential threat to their lives? They are poor. They are being beaten and cowed under by totalitarian governments. And all they want to do is come to America and be able to have a better way of life. Why would you keep them out? And I think that having a few incidents of violence against our citizens is a worthwhile risk to take to give these people entry into this country. Why would we keep them out?
But why don't we try to teach them what they should do? Shut up, Bruce. I see that. You're pushing buttons. I'm like, why shouldn't we And I mean, I even hate to say this because I hate the US necessarily overreaching into where they shouldn't necessarily go. But why can't we potentially help them figure out how to fix the problems in their countries to make them better? As a okay, I'm sorry.
Imperialist.
Yes.
Yeah, like, the United States has been the police of the entire world way too long. And by the way, I think it should be noted that all of that tirade came from a dude out in the Pacific Ocean. But yeah, I mean,
People's Republic of Hawaii. Thank you very much.
Okay, never mind. I'm not even going to go there. But yeah, it's we don't get it, and I appreciate the tongue-in-cheek tirade there, because I mean, why are we supposed to be Christians and loving, but we're letting them suffer? And we've already been in trouble 50 years ago with this whole, let's go and try and teach them how to do. But that's a different kind of thing altogether, because Vietnamese think differently. Just as an example.
Well, no, I get that, but I mean, having them come to a different place isn't necessarily the end-all be-all answer.
True.
Right.
But we haven't been able to change any government.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like, it just doesn't work.
Right.
We've changed first that.
Yes.
We've changed them. They just,
They revert to whatever is the
we've actually changed them, but not to say that it's been better.
because they've got democracies, but then they fix the elections.
And how do you all work this in with Jesus saying, love your neighbor as yourself?
Yeah.
How does that?
Yes, that's really the question. So how do we love our neighbor as ourselves? With this illegal immigration kind of discussion, how do we do that? Well, here, let me throw out one of the things. I mentioned this last week. So if we encounter someone who is of an illegal status, it makes sense to tend to their health issues, if that makes sense. It makes sense to tend to their immediate needs in terms of food and sustenance. But you can't harbor them. You can't harbor them because Romans 13, 1-7, paraphrase, says,
Obey the law
of the land. And the law of the land says you can't break the laws on purpose. Right? So you can tend to the needs. You can make sure that someone gets help when they're injured or near death. But even though your heart goes out to wanting to fix their situation, you can't. If you're going to follow what it is through Paul that Jesus is telling us. Because that's being a good citizen of the world. And it may hurt here, but folks, that's why when we're taking a look at some of these principles, that's why we have to tell folks that same-sex ideation is not what honors Jesus, even if that's what the person feels like in here. And you don't want to tell somebody that. Because the manuscript that we have that we rely on says that that's not God honoring. So sometimes our position is one that's unpopular.
They both said the same thing at the same time.
Birds of a feather.
I'm just being a jerk today, but I think it's worthwhile to say this. I think what our world looks at today is that laws are fluid. And so, for example, just to try to draw an equivalency. If I was driving down the road and I was in town and I saw somebody that had been in an accident and was injured, and I didn't have any sort of bandages or anything in my car, but I was next door to a closed drugstore, I know it's against the law for me to break in and for me to steal, but I would look and I'd say, well, looking at the situation here, it's better to do that and to save this person than to let them die. And so, and I think our justice system would probably look upon that in the same way as it works. And that's what's happening with illegal immigration today is as people are saying, well, yes, we know that it's illegal, but what we're saving these people from makes it justifiable. And so that's the challenge we have. And unless we answer that wisely, we kind of look heartless, to be honest with you.
Agreed. And America has changed substantially since our parents and their parents' generation. So recognizing the importance of your borders, the further we get away from World Wars I and II, the easier it gets to forget even 9/11. So we're very good that we're quick to forget things, especially that were awful, and we're quick to forget things for the most part anyway. And that's why when we talk about statues, when we talk about some of the historical elements, that's around because, look, the Lord had us celebrating holidays and important things because human beings like to forget.
Or don't like to remember.
Right. Either way. So Romans 13, 1 through 7, Acts 17, 26, I think Genesis 10, right, are all indicators that borders are God-oriented. And that once you're in the border of the nation, follow the law, Christian. Follow the law. And I like Bruce's situation. I know this is where this boldness thing comes in. You're at that car accident. The person needs triage. The person needs pressure on that wound. The drugstore's closed. The only way to perhaps get the items that you need would be to break in. Probably what you need to do is spend time figuring out that person's eternity at the car accident. Because like Will reminded us, you don't know for sure that you're going to be able to save that person's life if you break into the store and get the items. But you do know that they can have an encounter with Jesus while they're still conscious there at the scene of the accident. So sometimes weighing the import of situations, folks, that's a Holy Spirit oriented thing. By the way, I appreciate you playing anti-hero today, Bruce. That's a role a good friend of mine usually likes to play when you're presenting. So appreciate that. That's good. Child indoctrination. Now, this is presented because right now, at least some of the agenda of the world, and the United States especially, was at least waiting to get into our schools at high school. You recognize now it's in preschool.
But you got to look at it too. The question is, indoctrination itself is not necessarily good or bad.
Right.
It depends on what you are indoctrinating the person in.
Right.
Because, you've got child indoctrination, right? The definition is an instruction in a body of doctrine or principles, the installation of a partisan or ideological point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And we, as Christians, are supposed to train up the child in the way that he should go. So we in essence indoctrinate our children in our beliefs. And so you got, it's like, which way are you looking at this? Because, indoctrination, in my mind, if it's a Christian indoctrination has such a bad connotation to it. But if you look at definition, it's the instruction. And so depending on what it is that you are imparting, that's where the challenge comes into play. But if we have trained up our children, our family, our friends in the right way, then in theory, they can fight back against the indoctrination that's against God.
Okay. All right. You're talking about helping somebody to develop, and I always appreciate when Steve reminds us of this term, worldview.
Yes.
Okay.
I think that your concern with regard to what the indoctrination is, I think is easily answered when you look at the goal of the indoctrination. I think for some reason, I'm thinking of a time back in the early 40s, maybe even the late 30s, when a fellow with a very funny mustache tried to get people looking like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts with a neckerchief on, but they were getting taught to an end that they would be able to be part of a world domination. And again, domination is, I mean, how great would it be? We had a reference earlier about the world being turned upside down by these people. Well, that's kind of a domination, but the deal is different when it's something that wants to destroy and wants to hate and wants to, I mean, I think we need to look at the goal of the indoctrination.
No, I agree. But it also goes back to what people have always said is that critical thinking plays a big role in it. I mean, but you've got to be able to discern the good versus the bad, the right versus the wrong. Maybe that's a better way to say it.
Yes, sir.
Right. Second Colossians 2:8. See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ.
Okay.
We also
Reference.
have Colossians 2:8.
Thank you.
We also have Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect.
Okay. So those are great picture verses. How do you implement them? And I'm going to help you understand if we don't today.
Stop.
You have to put it back up.
Do it again.
Do it again, Bruce, because Diane didn't see it.
How do we implement that so that those scriptures get to play out? Because we're doing something really, really bad. Really, really, really bad.
Thinking.
Oh no, I
You got an idea?
Yeah.
There's some libraries.
Yeah.
Who are doing is it transgender story?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, there are a couple of pastors this week who launched Pastor Story Hour in response to that at the same libraries. And so they showed up and they led discussions and on Bible-based books. One of the pastors had written himself to discuss gender and how it began and in the beginning God.
Right.
So I think that's a good way to counter providing. Well, okay, they've got their narrative and they're trying to get you adjusted to think this is a normal way to behave. Well, how about this?
Okay. I think that's a fine alternative as a suggestion. What else?
Okay, 1 Corinthians 2:12-13 basically paraphrases is by passing on the truth, parents are showing love and respect. So we're not passing on necessarily the truth of God.
Yes, because you're hitting on where right now where the problem is.
Right.
Yes, there's the problem.
Exactly.
Problem is not so much. See, Steve is presenting kind of a challenge when you see it played in the public arena. The challenge right now is Christians are not training up their kids in the way they should go. And so what's occurring is your schools are getting more of a chance to manipulate your kids' thinking than you are. So you're not training up a kid in the way that they should go because you expect that when you send them to Sunday school or to teen group on Sunday, that's where they're going to get that. They're going to get that when Brother Gene preaches a sermon, when Pastor Bruce, and then as Steve likes to say, when they play teen games later on in youth group. And Monday through Saturday, you spend this much time training up your kid in the way that they should go. So who's got more influence over your kid? The school and the system at large, or y'all?
The drag queen.
The drag queen is right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's
Nicely done, Will.
it's really sad when you think about where the public education began.
Yes.
Because there's a reason it was called Sunday school was because it started there, and their reading material was crazy stuff like the Bible and Pilgrim's Progress.
Correct.
And so they began to think critically. They began to read, and then when they realized that, hey, you know what? this is pretty cool. Why don't we do this 5 days a week and we can sponsor and get money behind it? And then they'll, you as gold makes the rules came in. And so they changed the rules because they were providing money. So it started out with a noble cause. And then we basically took our hands off the wheel and said, go.
Correct.
And you're right. We're not doing what we ought to be doing when it comes to public education. And now, on that note, when I went to this place, LU people, that I went to, one of the things that they did was they did not teach me, and this is, I don't know what they do now much, but they didn't teach me what to think. They taught me how to think, how to reason, and I appreciate it. It was not so much indoctrination as it was equipping your life.
So you're talking about that thing that Sarah brought up earlier, which is critical thinking. And when you're taught how to think instead of what to think, it's not fill in the blank. It's for the most part, unfortunately, it's a short answer. You need to explain, you need to say what you think, and then you need to explain why. And that's going to be sometimes situational or circumstantial based on what it is that you're encountering. So our SOLs and our education system right now is based on people kind of doing this word that, it's regurgitation. It's vomiting back what you've learned in school because that's the right answer, and that's what creates tenure for the teachers and keeps the government money coming in, with the school getting the grade that they get.
You could care less about the education. They just want to control on what they're teaching.
Well, you know what? Indoctrination, in a way, is always about control.
Yeah.
It always is. But the key is, do you want folks that are controlled from a godly standpoint or from a secular standpoint? And right now, for the most part, we've given our kids up to a country that, for the most part, is instilling our kids with everything's okay.
Well, it's because now parents are letting children make their own choices at age 2, 3, 4, 5. And instead of being, and Steve and I've had this conversation, instead of being parents, they're trying to be their friends. Exactly. And you can't do that.
Well,
at least, you can't do that at least up until they become adults, But I mean, we've had that conversation that they want to be their friends, whereas they don't want to necessarily tell them no because they don't want to hurt their feelings. So they want them to like them.
Right.
Okay. My kids may not like me, but I know they love me and I love them. But, I can't be their friends. You've got to be their parent.
Now parenting is even more caught up in this.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Kids are suffering because the parents aren't paying attention.
Well, you better ascribe to what your kid is saying. So if our kids are able to vote for themselves, hormone, psychotherapy, and treatment because God mismade them, well, if my kid would like to be a fire engine, I should go looking for transformer parts for my kid so that my kid is part kid, part fire engine.
Dog, you need an oil change.
Sure, when he needs an oil change, exactly. Don't be laughing at my kid. It's my kid. My kid is part kid, part fire engine.
I'm gonna be laughing.
Don't.
This wants to be a hanger.
Well,
Float hanger.
sure.
Now we do have parents are trying to take this advice from but it's almost impossible to step that gene back in the bottle. So long.
It's too late.
They're not giving up that control.
Too late. Too little. Too late.
Well,
The problem there is
the
problem there is, civically speaking, is that where the turn came, and it's been in our lifetime, is where the control of the school boards really was wrested from them, and so much money started to pour in from our federal government. The key to teaching our kids is having accountability at a local level. That's the reason we pay our property taxes. That's why we have local school boards. As long as we've got that intact, we're able to get to them relatively quickly. I can remember when I was in high school, they were going to take Christmas out of the Christmas program one year when I was a junior in high school. And the parents just flooded the next school board meeting and basically said, you change this or you're out. And they changed it, and we had a Christmas program. But now that there is so much, and it's always, Gene said it, whoever's got the gold has the rule. When the money is coming from the federal government and there's so many strings attached to that, It's not your local people making the decisions anymore. It's somebody in Washington that's a bureaucrat, that's not elected, that's unaccountable. And that's not really Bible, I guess, to a large extent, but that's the reality we're living in right now.
So antichrist is now.
Yeah. You're right that everything is so anti-Christ. And folks, look, Bible tells you this is the kind of world we're supposed to be living in anyway, but we need to be well equipped to be able to push back on it. My wife was doing a little bit of research this week and discovered this interesting component that I didn't really, I never put this together before, but sometimes the way that she compiles information helps to kind of illuminate some information that you just never thought. She took a look at the impact of red votes versus blue votes. Red meaning Republican or conservative votes, and blue, Democratic or much more liberal. And most of the country is red.
It's very amazing. I saw that same map. It's very amazing.
Most of the country is red. And the cities.
In the cities, yes.
The cities are all blue. And so they have managed to influence our country to such a degree that the laws and the practices now tend to be those that are much more liberal. So when Bruce is talking about that the money is that which sometimes dictates how we operate, well, the cities in a lot of ways control the purse strings.
Well, didn't we have a lot more time, even when I was younger, to fight for what is right? And now we are so busy, we get ourselves so busy, and we're also now in the minority of the country that we are not standing up. We feel powerless.
Yeah. And that's why that Good Samaritan story is always important. Because the guy that the two guys that passed the dude, number one, he's a Samaritan. Number one, he's in a dire position, and I don't want to help. But more importantly, they're busy and they have something to do. The guy that stops last, and sometimes we don't talk about this a lot, was going someplace and stopped, took his time, nursed, paid attention, and then took money out of his own purse to make sure that the guy was not only taken care of, but will be taken care of in terms of recovery. So, Christians, if you're too busy, part of that is you got to manage that. That's why the Jesus Encounter questions are important. Because if you're too busy to find opportunities, then you've got to manage your day so you have more. And guys, Steve reminds us of this on occasion. We talk about this. Look, the world that the 12 disciples came into was just as messy, if not perhaps messier than this one. With the luxury, the debauchery, the idols that were blatant, the prostitutionism that was happening as worship. And those guys managed to change the world so that the morals and ideals were more Jesus-oriented for quite some time. Now we're kind of sinking back into hedonism. So this is not a surprise to Yahweh God, but guys, we've got to mobilize and do what our job is. So if our job is sitting back watching Jesus work, man, look at the Lord work, look at the Holy Spirit. You're supposed to be a part of that.
I had an occasion last night to suddenly find myself a student, suddenly found myself in school, in a very unlikely place. I'm in AutoZone, and the lady is ringing out, both of them with the tan you've got, asked the guy if he wanted to contribute to St. Jude's. He declined. She proceeded to ask him if he knew the history behind that hospital. I learned something, because what was going on back when he started this hospital, and I knew where she was going to a certain degree. Danny Thomas, Marlo Thomas, Lebanese, blah, blah, blah. I knew that much. But what she told me that I didn't know was one of the motivations he had, in addition to responding to a promise that he made to God if he got through stuff, was that there were hospitals in that day where folks who were sick of color were not allowed. And so his motivation was to have a place where every child had a fighting chance. Those are his words. And I didn't realize the motivation there. And she taught me. She was born down here at a black hospital in 61. Okay. Right beside MCV. But her mother wouldn't have been permitted in MCV at that. So they had this whole segregation going on. She understood kind of like what Will Smith's aunt told him in Fresh Prince. You know, she explained to him that she understood the struggle better than he did. And this lady, I don't even remember her name, but she's amazing because one of the things that she pointed out was she read the biography, she read the story, and she said the words, reading is fundamental. If we're readers, then these sorts of things, the critical thinking, can actually come naturally. Plus, somehow, imagine that we ended up straying from this whole racial motivation for a wonderful institution to gender. And I forget exactly where she might have steered that. It was like, there are two, that's it. And anyway, I think that we can learn a lot if we begin to listen to people and understand that we have a responsibility. I take great encouragement from the two Jenkins boys. And I'll say about myself as well. We're products of the public school education system, but we weren't left to their devices. And I appreciate these two guys that turned out. I appreciate that there was enough influence to overcome some of the steering to the point where Daniel changed his school because he knew he was not where he needed to be. Not that liberty's for everybody, but he knew that he was getting an indoctrination that he did not want. So that's my tirade.
Okay. All right, let's end a little early today.